I thought I was just taking a caretaker job to escape my past. I had no idea that my own sister had orchestrated my downfall from the very beginning, using my desperation to destroy the one chance I had left at happiness. The champagne flute slipped from my fingers before I could even process what David Stein was saying. Crystals shattered against the marble floor of the Rosewood Country Club's private dining room, sending fragments across my designer heels. "What did you just say?" I whispered. "Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you." David sat perfectly still in his navy suit, hands folded on the white tablecloth, looking at me with the detached expression he might use to fire an employee. "I said the engagement is off, Simone." His voice was rehearsed. "I'm sorry you had to hear it this way. Sorry I had to hear it." As if the problem was my listening, not his speaking. We were supposed to be celebrating our 6-month engagement anniversary. The same table where he'd proposed in January, getting down on one knee in front of half the city's elite. The same dining room where my mother had thrown my engagement party 3 months ago. "Is this about the wedding costs?" I grasped for explanations. "We can scale back. It's not about money, it's about compatibility. We want different things." "Different things?" "Yesterday you were planning our honeymoon in Tuscany." Something flickered across his face, guilt, maybe irritation. Yesterday I hadn't had the conversation with Miranda. My blood turned to ice. Miranda Close. She helped me realize what I actually want in a partner. David reached into his jacket and placed a small velvet box on the table, not to give me something, but to take something back. "The ring. It's a family heirloom." I stared at my left hand, at the 3-carat diamond I'd been showing off for 6 months. The ring that had made this whole thing feel real. "Miranda helped you realize that," I said, slowly. "She's more aligned with my long-term vision. She understands the social obligations that come with my position. She grew up in this world, unlike me." He didn't say it, but the implication hung heavy. Miranda Close, daughter of Judge Harrison Close, granddaughter of Charleston aristocracy. Someone who moved in the same circles, understood the unspoken rules of old Southern money. "How long?" I asked. "How long?" "What? How long have you been seeing her?" David's jaw tightened. "It's not like that. This isn't about another woman. This is about recognizing fundamental incompatibility. But it was about another woman." I could see it in how he avoided my eyes, in his nervous finger tapping, a habit I'd learned to recognize over 18 months of dating. "The wedding is in 8 weeks, I said, voice shaking. "Invitations went out last month. I'll handle the cancellations." "You won't be financially responsible." The casual dismissal of 8 weeks of planning, months of preparation, years of building toward this moment, like erasing a chalkboard. I slipped off the ring with trembling hands and placed it beside his untouched wine. The diamond caught the chandelier light, sending rainbows across white linen. "Thank you for your honesty," I said, standing on unsteady legs. I walked out with my head high, past curious diners, past the hostess who'd congratulated us. Made it to my car before the first sob escaped. Only in the parking lot, watching other couples walk hand in hand toward the entrance, did I let myself fall apart. I drove aimlessly through Charleston's cobblestone streets, past antebellum mansions and Spanish moss that now looked like stage props in someone else's performance. My phone buzzed incessantly. I finally pulled over near White Point Garden to check the messages. What I found made my stomach drop. "Heard about tonight. So sorry but honestly, we all saw this coming. You two were never really a match." "Lucinda." David told Miranda weeks ago he was having doubts. Surprised it took this long. "Jennifer. At least now you can find someone more your speed." "Catherine." Weeks ago. David had told Miranda weeks ago. These weren't friends offering comfort. These were people who'd known what was coming, and had been waiting for the show to end. People who'd smiled at my engagement party, helped me plan details, congratulated me on finding such a wonderful catch. All of them waiting for me to fail. I dialed the one number I thought I could trust. My sister Samantha picked up immediately. Simone? Oh honey, I just heard. Are you okay? Her genuine concern felt like a lifeline. Samantha was 3 years older, a successful interior designer who'd been my anchor in Charleston's social waters. She'd introduced me to David at her firm's charity auction, been my maid of honor, spent countless hours helping plan a wedding that would never happen. Sam, did you know? Did anyone tell you David was having doubts? A pause. Too long. Simone, sweetheart, where are you? I'm coming to get you. Answer my question. Did you know? Another pause. Then quietly, I had concerns. Concerns. The word came out sharp. What kind of concerns? David called me 2 weeks ago. He said he was having second thoughts but didn't know how to bring it up. He was worried about hurting you. 2 weeks. While I was picking centerpieces and finalizing catering, my fiancé had been confiding his doubts to my sister. 2 weeks of watching me plan a wedding he knew wouldn't happen. And you didn't think to tell me. He asked me not to. Said he needed time to figure things out, that telling you would create unnecessary drama if he worked through his concerns. Unnecessary drama. As if my right to know was just drama. What else, Sam? A longer pause. Miranda's been helping him work through his feelings. She's been a good friend during this difficult time. A good friend. I laughed bitterly. Is that what we're calling it? The pieces clicked together. Miranda, increasingly present at our gatherings. Miranda, offering to help with wedding planning, suggesting vendors who fell through, recommending services that didn't work out. Miranda, so helpful, so concerned, so involved in every detail. How long have they been seeing each other? Don't lie to me. Silence stretched. Finally, they had dinner last month. Just the two of them. To discuss the situation. What situation? Your relationship. Miranda thought maybe she could help him see that you two could work through his concerns. But Miranda hadn't helped David work through concerns about me. She'd helped him realize he'd rather be with her. Where are you right now? I asked. At home. Please come over. No. I think we've talked enough. I hung up and stared at Charleston Harbor as evening light faded. Everything I'd believed about my relationships, my future, all built on lies. David hadn't suddenly realized we were incompatible. He'd been planning this for weeks with Miranda's help, and my sister's knowledge. My phone buzzed. Heard the news. Come home. We'll figure this out together. Mom, figure this out. As if this was a problem to be solved, rather than a life that had been systematically dismantled. The elevator to my apartment felt endless. By the 7th floor, my hands had stopped shaking, but something colder had settled in my chest, a numbness worse than the initial shock. I fumbled with keys, dropping them twice. The apartment looked identical to 3 hours ago, but everything felt different. Wedding magazines on the coffee table, the dress bag hanging on the bedroom door, save the date magnets covering my refrigerator, small monuments to a future that no longer existed. I kicked off the designer heels and left them where they fell. That's when I noticed the envelope on my hall table, cream-colored paper with my name in elegant script. I didn't remember it being there, but I'd been running late to meet David. Inside was letterhead from Meridian Marketing Group, my company. The words made no sense at first. Due to recent budget restructuring and client feedback, we regrettably must terminate your employment effective immediately. Your final paycheck and benefits information will be forwarded. We wish you the best in your future endeavors. Terminated. Effective immediately. After 4 years of 60-hour weeks, building client relationships, being promised partnership track 6 months ago. I called my boss, but it was 9 p.m., straight to voicemail. Then I called Marcus, my colleague. Simone, hey, I heard about tonight, the David thing. I'm sorry, how did you already hear? Never mind. Marcus, did you know they were letting me go? A pause. It's not personal. The Worthington account specifically requested you be removed from their team. The Worthington account, our biggest client, 30% of agency revenue. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The account I'd managed successfully for 2 years. Why would they request that? Someone told them about your financial situation, wedding debt you've been carrying. They were concerned about your stability. What wedding debt? David and I have been splitting costs evenly. That's not what they heard. Someone provided documentation showing significant loans to fund a lifestyle you couldn't afford. Made it look like you were using company resources inappropriately. The room spun. Documentation from who? I don't know. It came through official channels. Bank statements, credit applications, receipts. Pretty convincing picture of financial instability. After hanging up, I pulled up my actual bank statements on my laptop. Everything looked normal. No unusual loans, no suspicious activity, which meant the documentation was either fabricated or someone had manipulated information to create false evidence. Someone with access to my personal details, social security number, employment information. Someone close enough to have all my data. The timing struck me. David's sudden clarity about incompatibility. Miranda's convenient availability. My sister's advanced knowledge. The termination letter waiting at home, as if someone knew exactly when I'd need to find it. This wasn't coincidence. This was orchestrated. My phone buzzed. Sweetheart, I know tonight was difficult, but perhaps this is for the best. Come home this weekend. Mom, perhaps this is for the best. As if losing my fiancé and job in one night was a blessing. I looked around my apartment, the lease I'd planned to break, the furniture I'd planned to store. The life I'd been preparing to merge with David's. Now it felt like a life raft. The only problem, I couldn't afford rent without my job. And something told me that was exactly what someone had been counting on. I poured wine and settled in for a sleepless night. Tomorrow I would start looking for answers. Tonight I would mourn, not just for David or the wedding, but for the naive woman who'd believed the people who loved her actually wanted her to succeed. That woman was gone forever. Maybe that wasn't entirely bad. Monday morning came too fast and not fast enough. I'd spent the weekend in a haze of phone calls to vendors, each conversation more humiliating than the last. The caterer wanted to keep half the deposit. The florist claimed the flowers had already been ordered and couldn't be returned. The venue coordinator spoke to me in the tone reserved for people who'd lost their minds. But it was the call to my landlord that broke me. "Miss Willis," he said, his voice professionally sympathetic. "I understand you're going through a difficult time, but I received some concerning information about your employment status." I gripped the phone tighter. "What kind of information?" "Your employer contacted us directly. Apparently, there were some irregularities with your employment that made them question your ability to maintain rent payments." "My employer contacted you." The room started to spin again. They can't do that. That's a violation of privacy. Actually, it's standard practice when there are concerns about a tenant's financial stability. They provided documentation suggesting you might be facing significant financial hardship. More documentation. More lies packaged as official truth. "Mr. Rodriguez, I've been a good tenant for 3 years. I've never been late with rent, never caused problems. I know, and that's the only reason I'm giving you 30 days instead of the standard 15. But I've already promised the apartment to someone else starting next month." "I'm sorry, Simone." After he hung up, I sat on my kitchen floor and let myself fall apart completely. 30 days to find a new apartment with no job, no references, and a credit report that had apparently been poisoned by whoever was orchestrating this nightmare. I called my bank to check my savings account, praying I had enough to cover a security deposit somewhere. The automated system told me my balance was $847. Last month it had been nearly $8,000. My hands shaking, I drove to the bank branch and demanded to speak with a manager. The woman who met with me was young, probably new, and clearly uncomfortable. "Miss Willis, I see several large withdrawals over the past 2 weeks," she said, scrolling through her computer screen. "All authorized with your PIN and signature."
"I didn't make those withdrawals."
She turned the screen toward me. There were my bank statements, showing withdrawal after withdrawal. 500 here, 1,000 there. All from ATMs around Charleston, all during times when I could prove I was somewhere else. This is identity theft, I said. Someone has been using my information. The signatures match our records, she replied carefully, and the PIN was used correctly each time. I stared at the screen, at the careful forgeries of my signature, at the ATM locations that painted a picture of someone living recklessly, desperately, someone who was draining their savings to fund a lifestyle they couldn't afford. I need copies of all of this, I said. I'm filing a police report. But when I got to the police station, the detective assigned to my case looked at me like I was wasting his time. Miss Willis, I understand you're upset about your recent termination and personal issues, but bank fraud is serious. Are you sure you didn't make these withdrawals and simply forgot? I'm sure. Because often when people are under stress, weddings, job changes, they don't remember every transaction clearly. He didn't believe me. I could see it in his eyes, the same look I'd been getting from everyone lately. Poor Simone, having a breakdown, imagining conspiracies where there were only personal failures. Someone is systematically destroying my life, I said. My job, my relationship, my housing, my finances. This isn't stress or forgetfulness, this is deliberate. Do you have any idea who might want to do that? I opened my mouth to say my sister's name, then stopped. What evidence did I have, that she'd known about David's doubts, that she'd introduced us in the first place, that she'd been suspiciously absent when I needed her most this weekend? I'm working on that, I said, instead. That evening, I sat in my rapidly emptying apartment. I'd already started selling furniture to raise cash, and made a list of everything that had happened. David's perfectly timed breakup with Miranda waiting in the wings. My job termination based on fabricated financial instability. My eviction notice arriving within days of my firing. My savings account drained through expert forgery. My sister's advanced knowledge of David's doubts. The timing of everything happening just weeks before the wedding. Someone had been planning this for months. Someone with access to my personal information, my work situation, my relationship details. Someone who knew exactly how to make it look like I was the architect of my own destruction. My phone buzzed with a text from Samantha. Mom's worried about you. You should come home for a few days. Clear your head. Home, back to Savannah, to my childhood bedroom, to admitting that I'd failed at the independent life I'd built in Charleston. I looked around my apartment one more time. In 30 days, I'd be homeless, jobless, and broke. I had no references for a new job, no savings for a security deposit, and no idea who was destroying my life or why. But I had one thing they hadn't taken yet, my anger. And anger, I was learning, could be a powerful fuel for survival. I texted Samantha back, I'll figure it out myself. But even as I sent the message, I knew I was lying. I had no idea how to figure anything out. I just knew I wasn't going to give up. 3 days later, pride officially lost the battle against desperation. I found myself standing outside a small ranch house in Somerville, 30 miles from Charleston, holding a suitcase and what remained of my dignity. This wasn't my childhood home in Savannah. This wasn't my mother or Samantha. This was Mrs. Elena Strauss, my college roommate's mother, who had somehow heard about my situation through the mysterious network of Southern women who knew everything about everyone. I'd met Elena exactly 3 times in my life, but when she called Tuesday morning and said, "Honey, I heard you're having some trouble. Come stay with me until you get back on your feet," I almost cried right there on the phone. Mrs. Strauss, I couldn't possibly impose. Nonsense. I've got too much space and too much time since Robert passed. You'd be doing me a favor. Elena opened the door before I could knock, a tiny woman in her 70s with silver hair and eyes that missed nothing. She took one look at me, and immediately pulled me into a hug that smelled like lavender and fresh bread. "Oh, sweetheart," she said, "you look like you haven't slept in a week." "I haven't." "Well, we'll fix that. Come on, I've got the guest room ready." The house was everything my life wasn't right now. Warm, stable, peaceful. Family photos covered every surface, and the walls held the kind of artwork that gets accumulated over decades of a happy marriage. Elena led me to a cozy bedroom with a quilt-covered bed and windows that looked out over a garden. "Now," she said, setting my suitcase on the bench at the foot of the bed, "you can stay as long as you need. The only rule is honesty. I've lived long enough to spot a lie from 3 counties away." That evening, over homemade chicken and dumplings, I told Elena everything. About David and Miranda, about losing my job, about the mysterious documentation that kept appearing to destroy my reputation, about my sister's knowledge of David's doubts, and my growing suspicion that nothing about this situation was accidental. Elena listened without interrupting, occasionally nodding or making small sounds of sympathy. When I finished, she sat back in her chair and studied me. "So," she said, "who benefits from your failure?" "What do you mean?" "In my experience, when someone goes to this much trouble to destroy another person's life, it's because they gain something from it. Money, position, opportunity. What does your downfall give someone else?" I'd been so focused on who might hate me enough to do this, that I hadn't considered who might profit from it. "I don't know," I admitted. "I don't have anything anyone would want, don't you?" Elena raised an eyebrow. "You had a successful career, a wealthy fiancé, a place in Charleston society. Someone wanted those things badly enough to frame you for financial instability and manipulate your personal relationships. But David chose Miranda. It's not like I could have stopped him from, could you?" The question hung in the air. Could I have stopped David from leaving me for Miranda if I'd known what was happening? If I'd been warned that my sister was feeding him doubts about our relationship? If I'd realized that Miranda was positioning herself as his confidant and eventual replacement? "Maybe," I said quietly. "And your job? If you'd known someone was spreading lies about your financial stability, could you have defended yourself?"
"Yes."
I could have provided real documentation, cleared up the misconceptions before they reached the Worthington account.
Elena nodded.
"So someone wanted you confused, isolated, and unable to fight back. They wanted you to discover everything after it was too late to change the outcome." The realization hit me like cold water.
They wanted me desperate.
Exactly. And now you are. No job, no home, no savings, no support system in Charleston. You're completely dependent on other people's charity.
Which makes me vulnerable.
Or, Elena said with a small smile,
"It makes you free."
I looked at her questioningly.
"Think about it, honey."
Whoever did this to you is expecting you to run home to your family, defeated and grateful for whatever scraps they throw you. They're expecting you to be too broken to fight back, too ashamed to ask questions.
Aren't I? Are you? I thought about the past week.
The humiliation, the confusion, the desperate phone calls and rejected applications. But underneath all of that, something else had been growing. A cold, determined anger that refused to be extinguished.
"No," I said. "I'm not."
Elena reached across the table and patted my hand.
"Good. Because tomorrow we're going to start fighting back." "How?" "Well, first we're going to get you a job."
Something that gives you independence and income while you figure out who's been playing puppet master with your life. Mrs. Strauss, I appreciate the optimism, but I don't have references. And apparently my reputation in Charleston is, who said anything about Charleston? Elena's eyes twinkled. I've got a friend up in the mountains who's been looking for help. Private position, good pay, and far enough away that whoever's been sabotaging you won't think to look there. What kind of position? Caretaker, Elena said. For a man who's been having his own troubles lately, might be exactly what you both need. I stared at her. You're serious. Dead serious. Sometimes when life pushes you off one path, it's because you're supposed to be on a different one entirely. That night, lying in Elena's guest bed, I felt something I hadn't experienced in weeks. Hope. Not the naive hope I'd had before, when I believed that good intentions and hard work were enough to protect you from betrayal. This was different. Harder. The kind of hope that came from knowing you'd survived the worst someone could do to you, and discovered you were stronger than you'd thought. Tomorrow I would start over, not as the broken woman my enemies expected me to become, but as someone they'd underestimated, someone who was finally ready to fight back. I spent the next 3 days in Elena's guest room, staring at the ceiling and trying to convince myself that taking a caretaker job wasn't admitting defeat. I had a master's degree in marketing, 4 years of experience building campaigns for Fortune 500 companies, and a track record of success that should have made me untouchable. Now I was considering wiping down someone else's kitchen counters and organizing their medications. The irony wasn't lost on me. 2 weeks ago, I'd been planning a honeymoon in Tuscany. Now I was Googling caretaker duties and wondering if I was qualified to manage someone else's daily routine when I couldn't even manage my own life. Elena tried to give me space, but I could see her watching me with the careful attention of someone who'd raised 4 children and buried a husband. She knew the difference between healthy grief and dangerous despair. On Thursday morning, she knocked on my door with a cup of coffee and an ultimatum. "Get dressed," she said. "We're going for a drive, Mrs. Strauss. I appreciate everything you've done, but I'm not really up for." "I didn't ask if you were up for it. I said get dressed." 30 minutes later, we were driving through the South Carolina mountains, winding along roads that seemed to climb straight into the clouds. Elena had refused to tell me where we were going, but she kept glancing at me like she was waiting for something. "You know," she said finally, "when Robert got laid off from the textile mill, he spent 2 months sitting in his chair, convinced his life was over. 53 years old, no college degree, watching younger men with fancy educations take the jobs he'd been doing since he was 18. I stared out the window at the pine trees rushing past. What happened? He started fixing motorcycles in our garage. Turns out, 30 years of working with machinery had taught him things those college boys with their engineering degrees didn't know. Within a year, he had more business than he could handle. That's different," I said. "Robert had skills that transferred. I don't know anything about being a caretaker." Elena laughed. "Honey, you spent 4 years managing impossible clients, unrealistic deadlines, and office politics. You think taking care of one difficult man is going to be harder than running campaigns for the Worthington account." She had a point, but it wasn't about the difficulty. It was about what it meant. "It feels like I'm running away." From what? From Charleston. From my real life. From finding out who did this to me. Elena pulled over at a scenic overlook and turned off the engine. Below us, the valley stretched out in shades of green and gold, small farms and houses scattered like toys across the landscape. "Let me tell you something about running away," she said. "Sometimes the smartest thing you can do is get far enough from a situation to see it clearly. When you're in the middle of a fight, all you can see are fists flying. When you step back, you can see who's throwing the punches and why. But if I take this job, if I disappear into the mountains, whoever destroyed my life wins. They get exactly what they wanted, me gone." Do they? Elena turned to face me. Or do they get a false sense of security while you figure out your next move? I thought about that. About Samantha, who'd been calling twice a day since I'd refused to come home. About David, who probably assumed I was somewhere licking my wounds. About Miranda, who was likely settling into the life that had been mine. What if I never figure it out? I asked. What if I just disappear into this new life and never get answers? Elena reached over and took my hand. Then you'll have built a new life, but somehow, I don't think that's going to be a problem for you. Why not? Because in the 3 days you've been staying with me, you've reorganized my kitchen, fixed my broken porch light, and created a filing system for my medical bills. You're not someone who just disappears, Simone. You're someone who improves whatever situation you're in. We sat in silence for a while, watching hawks circle over the valley. Elena was right. I had been organizing, fixing, improving. It was what I did when I was stressed, when I felt out of control. I imposed order on chaos, found solutions to problems. Maybe that's exactly what this mysterious caretaker job needed. Tell me about him, I said finally. Hudson Willis, 34 years old, successful architect, until a car accident left him with chronic pain and mobility issues. He's been through 12 caretakers in 18 months. 12? I raised an eyebrow. What's wrong with him? Elena smiled. According to my friend Margaret, who manages his household, he's brilliant, stubborn, and completely intolerant of people who treat him like an invalid. Most of the caretakers have been older women who wanted to mother him, or young girls who saw dollar signs and thought the job would be easy. And you think I'd be different? I think you're someone who's just learned that life can knock you down hard and fast. I think you understand what it feels like to have your independence stripped away and your future rewritten by circumstances beyond your control. She was right. I did understand that. Better than I'd ever wanted to. The pay is excellent, Elena continued. Room and board included. Full medical benefits, and enough salary to rebuild your savings. The estate is isolated enough that you'd have privacy to think, plan, and figure out your next steps, or to hide from my problems indefinitely. That's up to you. I looked out over the valley one more time, at the small houses and winding roads that led away from everything I'd known. It did feel like running away, but maybe Elena was right. Maybe sometimes you had to run away from a fire to figure out who set it. When would I start? I asked. Elena's smile was triumphant. Margaret's expecting our call this afternoon. The phone call with Margaret went better than I'd expected and worse than I'd hoped. Her voice was crisp, professional, with the kind of authority that came from running large households for people who expected perfection. Mrs. Strauss speaks very highly of you, Margaret said after Elena handed me the phone. But I need to be clear about what this position entails. I understand it's a caretaker role. It's more than that. Mr. Willis requires someone who can manage his medical routine, assist with physical therapy, handle correspondence, and maintain complete discretion about his personal affairs. The last 3 caretakers quit within 2 weeks. What happened? A pause. Mr. Willis can be challenging. He's accustomed to independence and doesn't respond well to people who treat him as fragile. He's also extremely private. The isolation of the estate can be difficult for some people. How isolated? The nearest town is 40 minutes away. The estate sits on 200 acres in the Blue Ridge Mountains. No neighbors, limited cell service, and Mr. Willis rarely entertains visitors. It sounded like exactly what I needed. A place where whoever had destroyed my life couldn't reach me, where I could disappear completely while I figured out my next move. The compensation is $15,000 a month, plus room and board, Margaret continued. Health insurance, 2 weeks paid vacation annually, and performance bonuses based on Mr. Willis's improvement in his care routine. I nearly dropped the phone. $15,000 a month was more than I'd made at my marketing job. It was enough to rebuild my savings, enough to hire a private investigator, enough to eventually fight back against whoever had orchestrated my downfall. When would I start? If you're serious about the position, I'd like you here for an interview tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. sharp. The address will be texted to you if you accept. I looked at Elena, who was nodding encouragingly. I accept. Excellent. One final warning, Miss Willis. Mr. Hudson has very little patience for people who waste his time. Come prepared to demonstrate why you're different from the previous candidates. After she hung up, Elena and I spent the evening researching everything we could find about Hudson Willis. What we discovered was intriguing and troubling in equal measure. Hudson had been a rising star in sustainable architecture, designing innovative homes that blended seamlessly with natural environments. His firm, Willis Environmental Design, had won multiple awards and attracted high-profile clients who wanted luxury homes with minimal environmental impact. Then, 18 months ago, his life changed in an instant. A drunk driver ran a red light while Hudson was driving home from a client meeting in Atlanta. The other driver died on impact. Hudson survived, but with chronic pain from spinal injuries and mobility issues that ended his hands-on architectural work. The photos from before the accident showed a man who looked like he belonged in magazine spreads, tall, confident, with the kind of smile that suggested he'd never encountered a problem he couldn't solve. The few photos from after showed someone completely different, withdrawn, guarded, with eyes that held too much knowledge about how quickly everything could change. No wonder he's been through 12 caretakers, I murmured, studying an article about the accident. He lost everything that defined him. Sounds familiar, Elena said gently. She was right. Whatever Hudson Willis was dealing with, I understood the fundamental experience, having your life completely rewritten by circumstances beyond your control, watching the future you'd planned disappear overnight. That night, I lay awake wondering what I was walking into. A isolated estate with a reclusive, difficult man who'd scared away a dozen caretakers. No cell service, no neighbors, no easy escape if things went wrong. But then I thought about the alternative: crawling back to Samantha and admitting defeat, or continuing to live on Elena's charity while my enemies consolidated their victories in Charleston. At least this offered a path forward, even if it led somewhere I'd never imagined going. The next morning, Elena drove me up into the mountains along increasingly narrow roads that seemed to climb toward the clouds. After an hour of driving, we reached an unmarked gate that opened automatically as we approached. The driveway wound through dense forest for another 10 minutes before the trees opened up to reveal one of the most stunning homes I'd ever seen. It wasn't a traditional mountain cabin, it was a masterpiece of modern architecture that seemed to grow organically from the mountainside itself. Glass walls reflected the surrounding forest, and the roofline followed the natural contours of the landscape. Hudson designed this himself, Elena said, reading from her phone. It was featured in Architectural Digest 3 years ago. A woman emerged from the front entrance as we parked. Margaret was exactly what I'd expected, 50s, impeccably dressed, with the bearing of someone accustomed to managing complex situations. "Miss Willis," she said, extending her hand. "Thank you for coming. I hope you're prepared for this to be interesting." "In what way?" Margaret smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Let's just say that Hudson has very strong opinions about people who think they can fix him." As she led me toward the entrance, I caught a glimpse of someone watching from a second-floor window. He was too far away for me to make out details, but I could feel the intensity of his scrutiny. "Is that him?" "Yes. He's been watching every car that's come up the drive since 8:30 this morning. He doesn't like surprises." "How should I approach this?" Margaret paused at the front door and turned to face me. "Honestly, the previous caretakers either tried to mother him or managed him like a patient. Hudson Willis isn't looking for sympathy or medical management. He's looking for someone who sees him as a person, not a problem to be solved." She opened the door, and I stepped into what felt like walking inside a treehouse designed by a master architect. Everything was glass, wood and stone, with sightlines that extended through the forest beyond. "Mr. Willis," Margaret called up the stairs. "Your interview is here." A voice drifted down from the second floor, deep and slightly rough. "Send her up, let's get this over with." Margaret gestured toward the staircase. "Good luck. He's in the study, second door on the right." As I climbed the stairs, I could hear my own heartbeat. This interview would determine whether I disappeared into the mountains for the foreseeable future, or returned to Elena's guest room to figure out another plan. But more than that, something about this place, about the man waiting upstairs, felt like the beginning of something I couldn't yet understand, something that might change everything. I knocked twice on the study door, and waited for permission to enter. When it came, a curt "come in." I pushed open the door, and stepped into a room that took my breath away. The study was a perfect blend of functionality and beauty, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the Blue Ridge Mountains. Architectural drawings covered one wall, and a massive desk dominated the center of the room. Behind it sat Hudson Willis. The photos I'd seen online hadn't prepared me for meeting him in person. He was younger than I'd expected, maybe mid-30s, with dark hair that looked like he'd been running his hands through it. His face was lean, sharp-featured, and his eyes were the kind of blue that reminded me of winter skies, beautiful and cold. But it was his posture that told the real story. He sat carefully, precisely, like someone who'd learned to manage pain through controlled movement. There was a walking cane propped against his desk, and I could see the tension in his shoulders despite his attempt to appear relaxed. "Miss Willis," he said without getting up, "Margaret tells me you're different from the previous candidates. I suppose that depends on what made them similar." He raised an eyebrow. "Most of them spent the first 5 minutes telling me how sorry they were about my accident, how they were here to help me heal, how I shouldn't give up hope." "Should I not say those things?" "Not if you want the job." I studied his face, trying to read what he actually wanted to hear. "Then I won't. I'm not here because I feel sorry for you. I'm here because I need work, and you need help. Whether we're a good fit depends on whether we can both get what we need without driving each other crazy. For the first time since I'd entered the room, Hudson's expression shifted. Not quite a smile, but something less guarded. Sit down, he said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. Tell me about your qualifications for this position. I don't have any traditional qualifications, I admitted. I've never been a caretaker or worked in healthcare. My background is in marketing. Then why are you here? The question hung in the air. I could lie, give him some sanitized version of recent events that made me look like someone making a positive career change. Or I could tell him the truth and risk him deciding I was too much trouble. Because 3 weeks ago, my life fell apart, I said. My fiancé left me, I lost my job, and I discovered that someone I trusted had been systematically destroying my reputation. I need somewhere to disappear while I figure out who did it, and why. Hudson leaned back in his chair, studying me with new interest. That's refreshingly honest. Refreshing. Most people try to present themselves as having noble motivations for wanting to work here. You're admitting you're running away. I prefer to think of it as strategic retreat. And what makes you think you can handle living in isolation with someone you've been warned is difficult to work with? I looked around the study, at the architectural drawings that represented dreams that had been cut short, at the medical equipment discreetly placed among the normal office supplies. Because I understand what it's like to have your life completely redesigned by circumstances you didn't choose, I said. I understand what it's like to have people look at you differently, to have everyone think they know what's best for you better than you do. Hudson was quiet for a long moment. The previous caretakers couldn't handle the isolation. No cell service, no social life, no escape when I'm having a particularly bad day. I'm not looking for a social life right now. And as for bad days, I shrugged. I've been having nothing but bad days for 3 weeks. At least here I'd be getting paid for them. The work isn't glamorous. Physical therapy assistance, medication management, meal preparation, basic household organization. Some days I'm fine, other days I can barely get out of bed. I spent 4 years managing marketing campaigns, where everything was always on fire, and the clients changed their minds every 5 minutes. I think I can handle unpredictable schedules. Hudson picked up a folder from his desk and slid it across to me. Employment contract, $15,000 a month, room and board included, 2 weeks paid vacation annually, 6-month minimum commitment. I opened the folder and scanned the terms. Everything was exactly as Margaret had described, but seeing it in writing made it feel real. 6 months in the mountains completely cut off from Charleston, from the investigation into who had destroyed my life, from any chance of running into David or Miranda or Samantha. 6 months to disappear completely. There's one thing I need to know, I said, looking up from the contract. Why have you gone through 12 caretakers? What exactly am I walking into? Hudson's expression became unreadable. I don't tolerate pity. I don't want to be managed or fixed or healed. I want someone who can help me maintain the life I'm building now, not the life I used to have. And the others couldn't do that. The others saw a tragic case that needed their compassion. They tried to motivate me, encourage me, push me towards some version of recovery that matched their expectations. What do you see when you look at me? He considered the question seriously. Someone who's angry enough to understand that sometimes, the best thing people can do is leave you alone to figure things out yourself. It wasn't exactly a compliment, but it felt like the most honest thing anyone had said to me in weeks. When would I start? I asked. Today, if you're ready. Margaret can show you to your quarters, explain the daily routine, introduce you to my medical team. I thought about Elena waiting in the car outside, about the guest room I'd left that morning, about the life in Charleston that was continuing without me. I'm ready. Hudson signed the contract and slid it back to me. Welcome to the middle of nowhere, Miss Willis. I hope you find whatever you're looking for up here. As I signed my name at the bottom of the contract, I realized I had no idea what I was looking for. All I knew was that I was tired of running towards something that kept disappearing, and ready to try running away instead. Maybe in the silence of these mountains, I'd finally be able to hear myself think clearly enough to figure out who had orchestrated my downfall, and maybe, just maybe, I'd figure out how to fight back. Margaret led me through the house after Hudson dismissed us with a wave of his hand, and every room we passed felt like stepping into an architectural magazine. The main level flowed seamlessly from kitchen to living area to dining space, all connected by soaring ceilings and those incredible floor-to-ceiling windows that made the forest feel like part of the interior design. Hudson designed every detail, Margaret explained as we walked. The house was completed just 6 months before his accident. He'd planned to use it as a showcase for potential clients. It's incredible, I said, running my hand along a custom railing that curved like a branch. He must have been devastated to lose his career right after creating this. Margaret paused at the base of another staircase, this one leading to what appeared to be a separate wing. Hudson doesn't discuss what he's lost, only what he needs to manage day to day. She led me up to the second floor of the guest wing, where a long hallway was lined with windows overlooking the valley below. My quarters were at the end, a spacious suite with a bedroom, sitting area, and private bathroom that would have been luxurious even by Charleston standards. "You'll have complete privacy here," Margaret said, opening the curtains to reveal a view that stretched for miles. Hudson's rooms are in the main house, and he rarely comes to this wing. The kitchen is stocked with basics, but you're welcome to use the main kitchen when Hudson isn't eating. "What's his routine like?" Margaret pulled out a tablet and scrolled through what looked like a detailed schedule. "He wakes early, usually around 6. Physical therapy at 7, with a therapist who comes 3 times a week. Breakfast at 8:30. He spends most mornings working on architectural consulting projects. He can still design, just can't do site visits anymore." "What about afternoons?" "That's where you come in." Hudson has good days and bad days. Good days he's independent and basically doesn't need assistance. Bad days, the pain is severe enough that he needs help with basic tasks. Your job is to anticipate which kind of day it's going to be and adjust accordingly. Margaret showed me a cabinet filled with medical supplies, pain management equipment, and detailed charts tracking Hudson's medication schedule. The level of organization was impressive and slightly overwhelming. "The previous caretakers had trouble reading his moods," she continued. "They either hovered when he wanted space or disappeared when he actually needed help. How am I supposed to know the difference?" "You'll learn. Hudson isn't subtle when he's in pain, but he's stubborn about asking for help. You'll need to observe and anticipate." She handed me a key card and a folder thick with information. Emergency contacts, medical information, house systems, security codes. The landline works even when cell service doesn't. Dr. Stein comes for monthly checkups, and there's a physical therapist twice a week. Dr. Stein, Hudson's physician, based in Asheville, but he makes house calls for certain patients. The name sent a chill through me. Stein wasn't exactly uncommon, but after everything that had happened with David Stein, hearing the name felt ominous. "Any relation to the Charleston Steins?" I asked casually. Margaret looked up from her tablet. "I believe Dr. Sheldon Stein mentioned having family in Charleston." "Why?" My mouth went dry. Sheldon Stein. Could that be David's father? David had mentioned his father was a doctor, though I'd never met him. "Just curious," I managed. Small world. But it felt like more than coincidence. First David, then this job that had appeared exactly when I needed it most, now a doctor with the same last name. Were these connections? Or was I becoming paranoid? Margaret finished the tour by showing me the main kitchen, where she'd prepared a welcome dinner that would put most restaurants to shame. "Hudson typically eats alone, but he's invited you to join him tonight. Fair warning, he doesn't make small talk." An hour later, I found myself sitting across from Hudson at a dining table that could have seated 12. The silence between us wasn't uncomfortable exactly, but it was loaded with mutual assessment. "Margaret says you're settling in well," he said, cutting his steak with precise movements. "The room is beautiful. This whole place is incredible. Thank you." More silence. I tried a different approach. "How long have you been working with Dr. Stein?" Hudson's fork paused halfway to his mouth. "Since shortly after my accident. He specializes in chronic pain management." "Why?" "The name is familiar. I think he might be related to someone I used to know." "David Stein. The lawyer from Charleston?" My heart stopped. "You know David?" Dr. Stein mentions his son occasionally, says he's engaged to some Charleston socialite. Hudson's eyes met mine across the table. Though I suppose that was your story, wasn't it? The room felt like it was tilting. Hudson knew about David, had known when he hired me, which meant, did you know who I was before I got here? I asked quietly. Hudson set down his fork and leaned back in his chair. I knew your name was Simone Willis. I knew you'd recently had your engagement ended and lost your job. And yes, I knew about the David Stein connection. How? Dr. Stein mentioned his son's broken engagement, said the woman had become financially unstable and unpredictable. When Margaret told me about a candidate named Simone Willis from Charleston, I put the pieces together. I felt exposed, humiliated all over again. So this was what charity, pity for David's crazy ex-fiancée. No, Hudson's voice was firm. This was curiosity about someone who'd been systematically destroyed and was still fighting back. Dr. Stein's version of events didn't match the woman Margaret described from her phone interview. What do you mean? According to Dr. Stein, you had a breakdown, started making wild accusations about conspiracies, became financially irresponsible, but the woman who called Margaret was articulate, honest about her situation, and looking for legitimate work rather than handouts. I stared at him. So you hired me as some kind of experiment. I hired you because I recognized the discrepancy between what I was told about you and what you demonstrated yourself. In my experience, when someone's reputation doesn't match their behavior, it's usually because someone else has been controlling the narrative. The revelation hit me like lightning. Dr. Stein, David's father, had been spreading a specific version of my story, making me sound unstable, unpredictable, dangerous. But why would David's father be involved in destroying my reputation? And how far did this conspiracy actually reach? The next morning, I discovered what Margaret meant about Hudson's unpredictability. I arrived at the main house at 7 a.m. as instructed, only to find him sitting at the kitchen island, still in pajamas, staring at a cup of coffee that had clearly gone cold hours ago. Good morning, I said carefully, trying to read his mood. How are you feeling? He looked up at me with eyes that were glassy with pain. Fantastic, never better, ready to run a marathon. The sarcasm was so thick, I could have cut it with a knife, but underneath it, I could see genuine distress. His shoulders were rigid, his jaw clenched, and his hands were trembling slightly as they gripped the coffee mug. Bad night? I asked. Bad night, bad morning, probably going to be a bad day. Hudson attempted to stand, then immediately sat back down with a sharp intake of breath. The physical therapist will be here in 30 minutes. I need to cancel. Why? Because I can barely sit upright, and Kevin is going to want me to do exercises that involve moving my spine in ways that currently feel like someone's driving hot stakes through my vertebrae. I studied him for a moment. This was clearly one of those tests Margaret had warned me about. The previous caretakers had either pushed him to do things he wasn't capable of, or enabled him to avoid everything difficult. What does Dr. Stein usually recommend for days like this? Pain medication that makes me useless for anything productive, followed by bed rest until it passes. And how long does it usually take to pass? Hudson's laugh was bitter. Sometimes a day, sometimes a week. There's no pattern, no predictability. That's the joy of chronic pain. I looked around the kitchen thinking, there had to be a middle ground between pushing him too hard and letting him give up completely. What if we modified the session instead of canceling it? What do you mean? I mean, what if we told Kevin you're having a bad pain day, and asked him to focus on gentle stretching or pain management techniques instead of the regular routine? Hudson stared at me like I'd suggested something radical. The other caretakers usually just made the calls to cancel everything. Well, I'm not the other caretakers. Something shifted in his expression. Surprise, maybe, or cautious interest. You think Kevin would be willing to modify? I think Kevin is a professional who wants to help you manage your condition, not just follow a rigid schedule. The worst he can say is no. Hudson considered this. Fine, call him. But if he insists on the regular routine, I'm going back to bed. I found Kevin's number on the emergency contact list and called while Hudson listened. Kevin turned out to be exactly as accommodating as I'd hoped. Not only was he willing to modify the session, but he suggested several techniques specifically designed for severe pain days. "He'll be here in 20 minutes, I told Hudson after hanging up. "He's bringing some equipment for gentle heat therapy and wants to show you some breathing techniques that can help with pain management." "You seem pleased with yourself," Hudson observed.
I am actually.
"Problem solving is what I do. Even when the problem is me, especially when the problem is you." When Kevin arrived, an energetic man in his 40s with the kind of enthusiasm that usually annoyed people in pain, I watched him work with Hudson for the first time. The difference between his approach today and what I imagined his regular sessions were like was striking. Instead of pushing Hudson through difficult exercises, he focused on helping him find positions that provided relief. "How long have you been working with Hudson?" I asked Kevin during a break. "About 8 months. He's had some real improvements, but days like today are always challenging. The previous caretakers usually wanted me to push through the pain, but that's not always the best approach." "What do you mean?" "They seem to think that if Hudson just tried harder, worked through the discomfort, he'd get better faster. But chronic pain doesn't work that way. Some days you have to work with what your body can give you." After Kevin left, Hudson remained on the living room floor, where they'd been doing gentle stretches. I found him there an hour later, lying on his back with his eyes closed. "Better?" I asked. "Some." He opened his eyes and looked at me. "Thank you." "For what?" "For not trying to convince me I was being dramatic. For not canceling everything. He paused, searching for words. "For treating this like a problem that could be managed instead of a character flaw that needed to be overcome." "Is that what the others did?" "The others either babied me, or acted like I wasn't trying hard enough. You're the first person who's treated it like a logistics challenge." I sat down in the chair nearest to where he was lying. "That's what it is, isn't it? A logistics challenge. Some days your body cooperates, some days it doesn't. The goal is to work with whatever situation you're dealing with, not fight against it." Hudson was quiet for a long moment. "Most people don't see it that way. Most people haven't had their entire life restructured by circumstances beyond their control." "Right. I forgot you understand that particular experience." "Unfortunately, yes." We sat in comfortable silence for a while. Outside I could hear birds calling to each other across the forest, and sunlight streamed through the massive windows, creating patterns on the floor. "Can I ask you something?" Hudson said eventually. "Sure. Why didn't you ask me about Dr. Stein last night? About whether I was part of whatever conspiracy you think destroyed your life?" I considered the question. "Because if you were part of it, asking wouldn't get me honest answers. And if you weren't, then you're just someone dealing with your own problems who happened to get caught in the crossfire of mine. And which do you think I am?" "I think you're someone who's been through enough manipulation and control that you recognize it when you see it happening to someone else." Hudson turned his head to look at me directly. "For what it's worth, I don't think what happened to you was coincidence. Too many pieces, too perfectly timed. You believe me. I believe that someone went to a lot of trouble to isolate you from your support systems and destroy your credibility. The question is who benefited from that outcome." It was the same question Elena had asked, and I still didn't have a good answer. But for the first time since this nightmare started, I had an ally who understood what it felt like to have your life completely rewritten. That had to count for something. Over the next 2 weeks, Hudson and I settled into a routine that surprised us both. His pain levels fluctuated unpredictably. Some days he could work for hours in his study, other days he needed help getting dressed. But instead of the tension I'd expected, we developed an easy rhythm of adaptation. It helped that Hudson turned out to be nothing like the bitter, difficult patient I'd been warned about. He was sharp, funny when he wasn't in pain, and had an architect's mind for solving practical problems. When I mentioned struggling with the mountain roads during a supply run, he spent an afternoon drawing me detailed maps with shortcuts and scenic routes marked in different colors. "You don't have to do this," I said, watching him carefully ink in elevation markers. "I can figure out the roads eventually." "I know you can," he replied without looking up. "But why struggle when someone can make it easier?" It was such a simple philosophy, but it struck me how rare it was to encounter someone who offered help without making you feel diminished for needing it. On my third Thursday, I found Hudson in his study staring at his computer screen with an expression of pure frustration. Architectural drawings covered his desk, designs for what looked like a stunning mountain retreat. Problem? I asked, setting down his afternoon medication. Client wants modifications to a design that's already structurally perfect. They want to add a third story that will completely compromise the foundation and destroy the environmental integration I've spent months perfecting. Can you talk them out of it? Hudson laughed bitterly. That would require them respecting my professional opinion, which they might have done before my accident. Now they see me as the crippled architect who works from home and question every recommendation I make. I studied the drawings over his shoulder. Even to my untrained eye, the design was breathtaking. A house that seemed to grow from the mountainside naturally, with clean lines that complemented rather than competed with the landscape. This is incredible work, I said. These people are idiots if they can't see that. Unfortunately, idiots with money get to make the decisions. I sat down in the chair across from his desk. Can I ask you something personal? Shoot. Do you miss it? The site visits, the hands-on part of the work? Hudson leaned back in his chair, considering. Every day. I used to spend hours walking construction sites, checking details, solving problems in real time. Now I design beautiful things and hope other people execute them correctly. That must be frustrating. It's more than frustrating. It's like being a chef who can only write recipes but never cook the food. You lose the connection between vision and reality. There was something in his voice, a raw honesty that reminded me of how I felt about losing my marketing career. Not just the job, but the identity that came with it. I understand that, I said quietly. I used to love the chaos of campaign launches, the adrenaline of pulling together impossible timelines, the satisfaction of seeing strategies work in real time. Now I organize medication schedules and meal plans. Hudson looked at me with new attention. Do you miss it? The work? Absolutely. The people? Not so much. Because of what happened with your engagement, I hesitated. Over the past 2 weeks, Hudson and I had talked about everything except the specifics of our respective disasters. We'd maintained a careful boundary around the topics that were still too raw to examine. Because I realized that most of my professional relationships were built on what I could do for other people, not who I was as a person. When I couldn't do those things anymore, when I became the problem instead of the solution, everyone disappeared. Everyone. My colleagues didn't return calls. My clients acted like I'd never existed. Even my friends stopped inviting me to things because my drama was too complicated to deal with. Hudson nodded slowly. After my accident, I had visitors for about 2 months. Friends from the firm, former clients, people who'd worked with me on projects. They came with flowers and optimistic speeches about how I'd be back to normal soon. What happened? When it became clear that I wasn't bouncing back, that this was permanent, the visits stopped. People don't know how to handle someone whose problem doesn't have a clean resolution, so we became inconvenient. Exactly. Your situation is messier because someone actively destroyed your reputation, but the result is the same. The people you thought cared about you disappeared when you needed them most. I felt something shift in my chest, a recognition of shared experience that went deeper than just understanding Hudson's pain levels or medication schedule. Can I tell you something? I said. I've been thinking about Dr. Stein. Hudson's expression became more alert. What about him? He's not just spreading false information about me randomly, he's telling specific people specific things to create a particular narrative. That level of coordination suggests purpose. You think he's working with someone? I think David's father has been involved in this from the beginning. The question is whether David knows about it. Hudson was quiet for a moment. Would it matter if he did? What do you mean? I mean, would knowing that David was complicit change how you feel about him, or would it just confirm what you already suspect? I thought about that. It would change everything. Right now I can still believe that David genuinely fell for Miranda, that he's a weak man who was manipulated but not malicious. If his father has been orchestrating this, and David knew, then he didn't just break your heart, he destroyed your life deliberately. Exactly. Hudson reached across his desk and picked up a pencil, absently sketching lines on a piece of paper as he thought. "There's something else to consider," he said finally. "If Dr. Stein has been coordinating this campaign against you, and he's my physician, then my hiring you might not have been coincidence." The thought had occurred to me, but hearing Hudson say it out loud made it feel more real and more terrifying. "You think I was placed here deliberately?" "I think," Hudson said carefully, "that we need to figure out what game we're playing before we can decide how to win it." The discovery happened purely by accident. I'd been at the estate for 3 weeks when Hudson had his worst pain episode since I'd arrived. He'd spent 2 days barely able to get out of bed, and on the 3rd day, he'd asked me to retrieve some files from his home office, a separate building behind the main house that I'd never entered. "The key is in the kitchen drawer," he said, his voice strained. "I need the Morrison project files from the cabinet next to my drafting table." The office was an architect's dream: 2 stories of workspace with drafting tables, computer stations, and walls covered with projects spanning his career. It should have taken me 5 minutes to find the files Hudson needed. Instead, I spent an hour discovering something that changed everything. I found the Morrison files easily enough, but as I was gathering them, I noticed a folder that had fallen behind the cabinet. When I reached to retrieve it, my fingers touched something unexpected: a hidden panel in the wall that moved when I pressed against it. Behind the panel was a small safe, and behind the safe was a space containing files that Hudson clearly never intended anyone to find. I almost didn't look. This was Hudson's private space, his personal documents, and I had no right to invade his privacy. But one of the files had my name on it, my full name, Simone Marie Willis, in Hudson's handwriting. My hands were shaking as I opened it. Inside were copies of newspaper articles about my broken engagement, printouts of social media posts from David and Miranda's relationship, and most disturbing of all, detailed notes about my employment termination, my financial situation, and my family background. But that wasn't the worst part. At the bottom of the file was a series of email exchanges between Hudson and Dr. Sheldon Stein, emails that dated back 4 months, 2 months before my engagement ended. "Sheldon, I've reviewed the background information you provided on Simone Willis. She seems like exactly what we discussed. Intelligent, isolated, and desperate enough to accept the position without asking too many questions." "Hudson, I'm glad you agree. David's timeline has moved up, so we need to have everything in place within 6 weeks. The girl cannot be allowed to remain in Charleston where she might interfere with the merger plans." "Understood. Margaret will make contact with Mrs. Strauss as soon as David initiates the breakup. We'll present the caretaker position as an opportunity rather than exile." I read the emails 3 times, each time hoping I'd misunderstood something crucial, but the meaning was clear. Hudson had known about my situation before it happened. He'd been waiting for me to be destroyed so he could offer me this job. But why? I kept reading, looking for answers, and found them in an email thread between Hudson and someone whose name made my blood freeze. Miranda Close. "Hudson, Daddy wants to make sure you understand the stakes here. The Willis Family Trust needs to be dissolved before the state investigation begins. If Simone discovers the connection between her inheritance and your family's business dealings, everything unravels. Miranda, I've told your father repeatedly that I want no part of this scheme. My accident doesn't change the fact that stealing from my own cousin is morally reprehensible. It's not stealing, it's protecting family assets. Simone hasn't even claimed her inheritance yet. She doesn't know it exists. When Grandfather Willis died, he left portions of his estate to all his grandchildren, including the ones who'd been given up for adoption. Simone's share is currently sitting in a trust that expires next year. If she doesn't claim it, it reverts to the family. And you want to make sure she never finds out about it. We want to make sure she's too distracted and discredited to pursue it even if she does find out. David's father has been very helpful in creating documentation that suggests Simone is financially irresponsible and possibly mentally unstable." I sank into Hudson's desk chair, the files scattered around me, trying to process what I'd just read. I was Hudson's cousin. I had an inheritance I'd never known about, and my entire personal and professional destruction had been orchestrated to prevent me from claiming money that was legally mine. But the emails painted Hudson as reluctant participant, not willing conspirator. He'd called the scheme morally reprehensible and stated he wanted no part of it. So why was I here? Why had he hired me if he was supposed to be keeping me away from my inheritance? I kept searching through the files and found my answer in the most recent email thread. Hudson, I hope you understand that employing Simone was not part of our agreement. You were supposed to monitor her whereabouts, not give her a home and financial stability. Miranda, my accident gave me perspective on what family actually means. I'm done helping you steal from someone who's already lost everything. Your conscience is admirable but irrelevant. If Simone gets close enough to discover the truth about her inheritance, or if she starts investigating what really happened to her life, everyone involved goes down, including you. Then maybe it's time for the truth to come out. Hudson, I don't think you understand the situation you're in. Your medical care, your insurance, your ongoing treatment, all of it depends on family cooperation. Dr. Stein could very easily adjust your pain management protocol if you become uncooperative. The final email was dated just a week ago. I sat in Hudson's chair, surrounded by evidence that my life had been destroyed by my own family, relatives I'd never known existed who saw my inheritance as their rightful property. People who'd coordinated with David's father to make me look unstable and unreliable, who'd manipulated my sister into feeding David doubts about our relationship, who'd orchestrated every detail of my downfall. But Hudson, the man I'd been caring for, the man I'd begun to trust, was trapped in the middle. He'd started as part of the conspiracy, but had tried to protect me by giving me this job. And now he was being threatened for that decision. I heard footsteps on the office stairs and quickly gathered the files, shoving them back into their hiding place. Hudson appeared at the top of the stairs, moving slowly but with determination. Did you find the Morrison files? He asked. I held up the folder I'd originally come to retrieve, right where you said they'd be. Hudson studied my face carefully. You look like you've seen a ghost. Maybe I have, I said quietly. We stared at each other for a long moment. I could see in his eyes that he knew I'd found something, and he could probably see in mine that everything had changed. Simone, he said finally, there are things I need to tell you. I know, I replied. There are things I need to tell you too. My family, he began, then stopped. My family is not what you'd call ethical. Neither, apparently, is mine. Back in the main house, Hudson and I sat across from each other in his living room, the Morrison files forgotten on the coffee table between us. The afternoon light streamed through the massive windows, but the atmosphere felt heavy with secrets that were finally ready to surface. How much did you find? Hudson asked quietly. Everything, I said. The emails with Dr. Stein, the correspondence with Miranda, the details about the Willis family trust. Hudson closed his eyes and leaned back in his chair. I was hoping you wouldn't discover that for a few more months. A few more months, until after your inheritance expired. Until it was too late for you to claim what's rightfully yours. I stared at him. So you were part of the plan to steal from me. I was. Hudson opened his eyes and met my gaze directly. At first, before my accident, when all I cared about was protecting family business interests and maintaining my lifestyle. What changed? Lying in a hospital bed for 3 months gives you time to think about what actually matters. Realizing that the people you thought cared about you only visit when you're useful makes you reconsider your priorities. Hudson reached for his cane and stood up carefully, walking to the window that overlooked the valley. The Willis Family Trust was established by our grandfather. Your grandfather too, though you were never told that. He had 3 children, your father, who was given up for adoption, my father, and Miranda's mother. Wait, I held up a hand. Miranda Close is related to us. Second cousins. Her mother was a Willis before she married Judge Close. The family has been intermarried with Charleston society for generations. The pieces were clicking together with sickening clarity. So when David started dating me, Miranda knew exactly who I was. Miranda orchestrated David dating you. She introduced you at that charity auction, remember? Made sure he'd meet the heir to a fortune she wanted to keep in the family. But if she wanted to keep the money in the family, why break us up? Hudson turned back to face me. Because she realized that marrying you to David wouldn't give them access to your inheritance, it would give you access to their information. You're smart, you ask questions, you would have discovered the trust eventually. So they decided to destroy me instead. They decided to make sure you'd be too discredited and distracted to pursue your inheritance when you eventually learned about it. If you ever surfaced with claims to Willis family money, they'd have documentation showing you were mentally unstable, financially irresponsible, prone to making false accusations. I felt sick, and Dr. Stein was coordinating the character assassination. Dr. Stein owes the Willis family significant money from his medical school loans and practice startup costs. He's been the family's personal physician for decades, and they've used that relationship to influence his professional decisions, including manipulating your pain management to keep you compliant. Hudson's jaw tightened, including that. So when you hired me, you were supposed to keep me isolated and monitored. I was supposed to keep you away from Charleston, away from any opportunity to research your family history or legal inheritance. The job was designed to make you grateful for stability, while keeping you geographically and emotionally isolated. But you changed your mind. I changed my mind when I met you. When I realized you weren't the unstable, grasping woman they'd described. When I saw how you handled my worst days without pity or judgment. Hudson sat back down, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. Simone, there's something else you need to know. The inheritance isn't just money. What do you mean? Grandfather Willis owned significant real estate in Charleston, including properties that are now worth millions. But more importantly, he owned shares in several businesses that have environmental violations the current family has been covering up for years, including your architectural firm, including my firm. If you claim your inheritance and start asking questions about family business practices, it won't just cost them money, it could result in criminal charges. I understood now why they'd been so desperate to discredit me, why they'd gone to such elaborate lengths to destroy my life. They weren't just stealing my inheritance, I said. They were protecting themselves from prosecution. Exactly. And now that you know the truth, we're both in danger. What do you mean we're both in danger? I asked, though the cold fear spreading through my chest suggested I already knew. Hudson walked back to his chair, moving more stiffly than usual. Miranda's last email made it clear that my usefulness to the family has expired. They expected me to keep you isolated and compliant, not give you financial independence and emotional support. So they'll what? Cut off your medical care. They'll do whatever it takes to maintain control. Dr. Stein could easily claim that my pain medication needs to be reduced for my own safety. Margaret could be instructed to find reasons to terminate your employment. The estate could develop maintenance issues that require us to relocate. I thought about the isolation of our location, the limited cell service, how completely cut off we were from any outside support systems. They've been planning this for months, I said. Every detail of my destruction, every aspect of getting me here. They're not going to just let us walk away, now that we know the truth. No, they're not. Hudson reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a thick folder, which is why I've been documenting everything. What do you mean? I mean that for the past 6 months, I've been copying every email, every phone conversation, every document that comes through this estate related to family business. I've been building a case. He opened the folder and spread documents across the coffee table. Bank statements, property records, environmental reports, communication logs. It was like looking at the blueprint for a massive conspiracy. Why? I asked. Why would you risk this? Hudson was quiet for a moment. Because my accident taught me something important about the difference between being alive and being worth something. For 34 years, I thought my worth came from my ability to contribute to family wealth and maintain family status. And now I know that some things are more important than money or family loyalty, like justice, like protecting someone who's been systematically victimized by people who are supposed to care about her. I stared at him. You're talking about going to war with your own family. I'm talking about doing what's right. Finally, Hudson pulled out another set of documents. I've been in contact with a law firm in Atlanta, one that specializes in inheritance fraud and environmental crimes. They're willing to take your case on contingency, if we can provide sufficient documentation. Simone, I can't prove the environmental violations without your inheritance claims, and you can't pursue your inheritance without proof that it exists and that it's been systematically hidden from you. We need each other. I looked at the documents spread across the table, evidence of crimes spanning decades, proof of a conspiracy that had destroyed my life and threatened Hudson's future. What about Dr. Stein? What about your medical care? I've been researching pain management specialists outside the family's influence. There are options, but it means cutting ties with everything I've known, and you're willing to do that. Hudson met my eyes. The question is whether you're willing to fight for what's rightfully yours, knowing that it means taking on some of the most powerful families in Charleston. I thought about the past month, about David's calculated betrayal, about my sister's complicity, about the systematic destruction of my reputation and finances, about the inheritance I'd never known existed, money that could have changed my life if I'd known to claim it. But more than that, I thought about Hudson's willingness to risk everything to help me, about his decision to choose justice over family loyalty. What's the plan? I asked. Hudson smiled, the first genuine smile I'd seen from him since we'd met. First, we document everything we can access from here. Financial records, communication logs, property details. Then we contact the attorneys and the state environmental agency. And then we go public. Full exposure of the conspiracy, the inheritance fraud, the environmental crimes. We make it impossible for them to maintain their cover-up. They'll retaliate. Absolutely. Which is why we need to be prepared to leave here quickly when the time comes. I looked around the beautiful house Hudson had designed, at the life he'd built in these mountains. You'd give up all of this? I'd give up everything to help you reclaim what's rightfully yours, and to stop my family from continuing to destroy people's lives. I reached across the table and took his hand. Then let's do it. You're sure? I'm sure. It's time to fight back. Hudson squeezed my hand. In that case, we'd better get started. We have a lot of work to do, and not much time to do it. The next 2 weeks became a blur of covert activity. Hudson and I worked like investigative journalists, documenting decades of Willis family corruption while maintaining the appearance of a normal caretaker-patient relationship. We developed a routine. Mornings were for Hudson's legitimate therapy and work, afternoons were for gathering evidence, and evenings were for organizing our findings and planning our next moves. Hudson taught me how to access the family's shared digital files through his legitimate business accounts. What we found was staggering. Not just evidence of environmental crimes, but tax evasion, bribery, and systematic fraud dating back to our grandfather's generation. Look at this, Hudson said one afternoon, pointing to a series of bank transfers on his computer screen. Judge Close has been receiving monthly payments from Willis Holdings for 15 years, Miranda's father. The same judge who would likely oversee any legal challenges to your inheritance. The same judge who's been receiving what amounts to bribes to ensure Willis family interests are protected in his courtroom. I felt sick. How deep does this go? Deeper than I ever imagined. Dr. Stein isn't just compromised by debt, he's been actively participating in insurance fraud, filing false medical reports to support disability claims for family members who aren't actually disabled. Hudson pulled up another file. And your sister Samantha? Her interior design business has been receiving no-bid contracts from Willis Holdings subsidiaries. She's been financially tied to the family for 3 years. 3 years. The timeline clicked into place. She introduced me to David 3 years ago. She introduced you to David because she was already being paid to monitor your activities and relationships. They needed someone close to you who could influence your decisions and report back on anything that might lead you to discover your inheritance. The betrayal felt fresh all over again. Not just David, not just my career and reputation, but my own sister had been bought and paid for by people who wanted to steal from me. Hudson, what if we're not strong enough to fight this? What if they're too powerful, too connected? He turned from the computer and looked at me directly. Then we make sure we're not fighting alone. Over the following days, Hudson reached out to contacts he'd maintained from his years in sustainable architecture, environmental lawyers, investigative journalists, state regulatory officials who'd been frustrated by their inability to pursue Willis family violations. The key, he explained, is creating multiple pressure points simultaneously. They can't silence everyone if enough people know the truth. Meanwhile, I focused on documenting my own story, every detail of the systematic destruction of my life, every piece of fabricated evidence that had been used against me, every person who had participated in the conspiracy. But our preparation wasn't just about gathering evidence. Hudson insisted we also plan for the physical realities of what was coming. When we go public with this, he said, we'll have maybe 24 hours before they realize how much we know and move to stop us. We need to be ready to disappear quickly. He showed me emergency bags he'd packed, cash, documents, medications, everything we'd need to leave the estate immediately if necessary. Where would we go? I have a friend in Vermont who owns a cabin off the grid. No digital footprint, no connection to either of our families. We could stay there while the legal process plays out. You've really thought of everything. Hudson's expression was serious. I've had time to learn from being helpless once. I'm not going to let it happen again. The transformation in Hudson over those 2 weeks was remarkable. The pain was still there, the physical limitations remained, but he moved with a purpose and determination I hadn't seen before. He was no longer just surviving his circumstances, he was actively working to change them. There's something else, he said on our final night of preparation. Something I need you to know before we start this war. What? Whatever happens next, whatever we face, I want you to know that meeting you changed everything for me. Not just because you're family, not just because you deserve justice, but because you showed me what it looks like to keep fighting even when everything is taken from you. I felt something shift in my chest, an emotion I wasn't ready to name yet. Hudson, I'm not asking for anything, he said quickly. I just needed you to know that this isn't just about money or justice anymore. It's about protecting someone I care about. Tomorrow we would launch our attack on the conspiracy that had destroyed my life. Tonight, I realized I was no longer fighting alone. The confrontation came to us. At 7 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, I was preparing Hudson's breakfast when I heard the sound of multiple vehicles climbing the mountain road to the estate. Through the kitchen window, I could see a convoy of black SUVs winding their way up the drive. Hudson, I called out, my voice steady despite the adrenaline flooding my system. We have company. He appeared in the kitchen doorway, already dressed and moving with more purpose than I'd seen since his worst pain days. How many? 5 vehicles. Maybe 6 people total. Hudson reached into a cabinet I'd never seen him open and pulled out a small recording device. Whatever happens next, we document everything. The doorbell rang once, then immediately began ringing continuously, the sound of someone leaning on the button with aggressive intent. Showtime, Hudson said, walking toward the front door. I followed him, my heart pounding but my mind clear. We'd prepared for this moment, and now it was here. Hudson opened the door to reveal a group that looked like a delegation from Charleston's power elite. Miranda Close stood at the front, flanked by a man I immediately recognized as Dr. Sheldon Stein. Behind them were David, my sister Samantha, and a woman in an expensive suit who could only be a lawyer. Hello, Miranda, Hudson said, calmly. To what do I owe this unexpected family reunion? Miranda's eyes were cold with fury. You know exactly why we're here. Where are the files? What files? Don't play games, Hudson. We know you've been copying family documents. We know you've been filling Simone's head with lies about inheritances and conspiracies. I stepped forward so they could see me clearly. Actually, I found the files myself. All of them. The reaction was immediate and telling. Dr. Stein's face went pale. David looked genuinely shocked, as if he hadn't known the full extent of his father's involvement. But Samantha, my own sister, just looked angry, like a co-conspirator whose plan had been exposed. Simone, Samantha said, you don't understand what you're getting involved in. These people can destroy you. They already did destroy me, I replied. The question is why you helped them. Because you were never supposed to find out about the inheritance. Miranda snapped. Because that money belongs to people who've been responsible with family assets for generations. You mean the money that legally belongs to me? The lawyer stepped forward. Miss Willis, my clients are prepared to offer you a settlement that would provide financial security without the need for lengthy legal proceedings that might not go in your favor. Hudson laughed, a sound without humor. Let me guess, a settlement that requires Simone to sign away all rights to the Willis Family Trust and agree never to discuss family business matters. The offer is generous, the lawyer continued. More money than you could spend in a lifetime, plus assurance that your recent difficulties in Charleston would be resolved favorably. You mean the difficulties you created? I said. Dr. Stein finally spoke, his voice desperate. Simone, be reasonable. Take the settlement. Walk away. No one needs to get hurt. No one? Hudson's voice was sharp. What about the environmental damage your family has been covering up? What about the people living near contaminated properties? What about the systematic fraud you've all been perpetrating? Miranda's composure finally cracked. None of that matters. You're talking about destroying generations of family legacy for one girl who doesn't even belong in this world. Actually, I said quietly, I'm talking about claiming what's rightfully mine and exposing criminals who happen to be related to me. The standoff stretched for several tense seconds. Then David stepped forward. Simone, I need you to know, I didn't know about all of this when we were together. My father told me you were unstable, but I never knew about the inheritance, or the systematic. David, Doctor. Stein's voice was sharp with warning. But David continued, I was weak and selfish, but I wasn't part of the conspiracy to steal from you. I'm sorry. It was too little too late, but it confirmed what I'd suspected. David had been a pawn, not a mastermind. The offer stands for 24 hours, the lawyer said. After that, my clients will pursue all available legal remedies to protect their interests. Then you'd better get started, Hudson said. Because we're not taking your settlement. After they left, Hudson and I stood in the doorway watching their convoy disappear down the mountain. That went better than expected, he said. Better? They showed their hand completely. Now we know exactly who we're fighting, and how desperate they are. He was right. The confrontation had revealed the full scope of the conspiracy, and given us everything we needed for our counterattack. Now it was time to go public with the truth. 6 months later, I stood in the garden behind Hudson's estate, watching him walk without his cane for the first time since I'd known him. The morning sun filtered through the trees, and for a moment, everything felt impossibly peaceful. The legal battle had been swift and decisive once we'd gone public. The environmental violations alone had resulted in criminal charges against 3 family members, including Judge Close, who was now facing federal corruption charges. Dr. Stein had lost his medical license and was cooperating with investigators in exchange for a reduced sentence. Miranda Close was serving 18 months for inheritance fraud, and the Willis Family Trust had been fully restored to its rightful beneficiaries, including me. The inheritance was more than I'd ever imagined. Not just money, but properties, businesses, and the satisfaction of knowing that the environmental cleanup I'd funded was already improving lives in communities that had been poisoned for decades. You're thinking too hard, Hudson said, walking up behind me and slipping his arms around my waist. I'm thinking about how different everything is from 6 months ago. Different how? I turned in his arms to face him. 6 months ago, I thought I was broken. I thought losing David and my job, and my reputation meant losing everything that mattered. And now? Now I know that sometimes losing everything you thought you wanted is the only way to find out who you really are. Hudson smiled, the same genuine smile that had become my favorite sight in the world. And who are you, Simone Willis? Someone stronger than I ever knew. Someone who doesn't need anyone's approval to know her own worth. Someone who's learned the difference between being rescued and being supported. I like that person. Good, because she's not going anywhere. The past 6 months hadn't been easy. The media attention, the legal proceedings, the process of rebuilding my life from the ground up, all of it had been overwhelming at times. But I'd had Hudson beside me through every step, and somewhere along the way, our partnership had become something deeper. Simone, he said, reaching into his pocket. There's something I want to ask you. My heart stopped. Hudson, before you panic, he said with a laugh. this isn't what you think it is. He pulled out a small wrapped box. It's a key. A key to the house I'm designing for us. Not here, not on family property, but somewhere that's completely ours. I unwrapped the box to find a single silver key attached to a small blueprint charm. I know we said we'd take things slowly, Hudson continued. I know you need time to build your own life, separate from anyone else's expectations, but I also know that I want to build something with you, something that belongs to both of us. I looked at the key, thinking about the journey that had brought us here. From the woman who'd been destroyed by other people's manipulation, to the woman who'd learned to fight for herself. From the man who'd been trapped by family obligations, to the man who'd chosen love over loyalty. Where would this house be? I asked. Wherever you want it to be. We have options now. We do, don't we? Hudson nodded. All the options in the world. I thought about the life I'd thought I wanted, marriage to David, climbing the corporate ladder in Charleston, fitting into a world that had never really accepted me. Then I thought about the life I was building now, using my inheritance to fund environmental restoration, working with Hudson on sustainable architecture projects, creating something meaningful from the wreckage of my old life. Yes, I said. Yes to the house, yes to all of it, to building something that's ours, to taking the future we want instead of the one other people planned for us. Hudson picked me up and spun me around, and for the first time in my life, I felt like I was exactly where I belonged. Not because someone had rescued me, but because I'd rescued myself, and found someone worth building a life with in the process. 6 months ago, I'd thought my story was about being betrayed and destroyed. Now I knew it was about being set free. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.